What I'd like to do is talk about a project I worked on recently, which will hopefully be a useful example of how students work online, some of the issues with how they collaborate when they're in an online environment, and maybe some of the things that we can do to help support them. Now, this is based on a project I worked on at Loughborough and previously at Coventry, and it's called BIM Hub. Now, BIM is building information modeling, and it's a sort of online system which enables architects and structural engineers and everybody involved in making a building to exchange information. Now, this was funded by the Higher Education Academy, and it followed on from a previous project that was funded by Hewlett-Packard. So altogether, I worked on these two projects from 2011 to 2015. And so we've got a few cycles of students interacting with this and us learning about how to promote that. Okay, so this is BIM. So the key things about BIM is, as I said, it's about transaction of information from one place to another. But what it doesn't really help support is all of the soft skills that go with that. How do you enable students to communicate and share information when they're going online? How do you get them to actually work with each other? So we had a range of different sorts of students involved. This is part of the issue with the interactions. So we had groups of two students. That's what I mean by that is that there's three groups, two students from each university, so six groups, six students in each group altogether. The task they had was in semester 1 to design a building, and then in semester 2 to write a report about the building design. And they could use email, Dropbox, any social media they wanted, but look, there's a comma missing there. But they were, for their synchronous meetings, they had to use GoToMeeting, which is kind of like Skype and Connect and all those sorts of things. You can see there I've kind of described the different sort of students there were. So for the Loughborough students, it was mandatory; they had to do it, and the same was true at Ryerson. Ryerson was the university in Canada, and which it's in Toronto. But for the Coventry students, it was optional. They had a far bigger cohort, and so the students that didn't want to actually do the online stuff could then work with architects in Coventry instead. So for Loughborough and Ryerson, they had to do it. Coventry, they could either opt to work with these teams distributed across the UK and Canada, or they could work with the same sort of collaborative environment, but in a face-to-face environment. Same sort of collaboration, but in a face-to-face environment. And you can see the three sorts of subject disciplines that we were bringing together as well. Loughborough, project management; Coventry, structural engineering; and Ryerson were architecture students. The other difference as well was that Coventry and Ryerson were there all the way through both semesters, but in Loughborough, the students had other things to do. The modules were only one module long, one semester long. So we had one group of students for the first semester, when they were designing the building, and then we had another group of students coming in for the second semester in the report writing. So those teams, that part of the team was disrupted at that point. So this is why the students did it. Well, obviously the Loughborough and Ryerson students did it because they had to. The Coventry students, when they came to it, all of them found these were positive things about it, but the Coventry students came to this specifically because they wanted these things out of it. They found it motivating. They enjoyed doing this sort of stuff with students from other universities, but a lot of it was that they thought it was an authentic experience. They saw the world of work in their future being about working in distributed teams, and so therefore, if they had experience of this at university, then they would actually be able to be more employable, and they'd have a better chance of getting jobs because this would be on their CVs. They also thought it would probably be more interesting for the Coventry students than just working face to face. They thought that this was a new challenge, and they'd all worked collaboratively before in face to face environments. This was their first chance to actually work in an online environment. Now, the model we use, now the part of the reading is about transactional distance. And this is kind of how I brought in transactional distance, and the PI was interested in this input process output model. So in this kind of way, the way we categorized it was that we looked at transactional distance as being the input to the issue, to the problem. So all the challenges and barriers of working at a distance with other people, those were the things that were kind of the issues that the students had to address. As they worked and as they found ways around these, or as they found mechanisms to address some of these, we called this alignment. So the metaphor is that they're at a distance, and what they're happening, and during their working with each other, they're bringing themselves closer together and more closely aligned. And that's the process that they're going through when they're working in this environment. And their output is what they gain from it. What is the final product? And for the lecturers, it was that they could improve the student experience. For the students, it was they would be more employable in the future. Now, this is kind of one of the things that first came out when we were looking at how the students interacted. And talking to the students, we found that some of these collaborations were effective. Some of them weren't that effective. Now, the way we categorized these were we basically did a sort of content analysis of their interviews, interviewed each of the groups in turn, and looked at how often they came up with positive things about their experience of working with the others, and how often they came up with negative things, and where they were predominantly positive, that we saw that as a successful collaboration, and where they're predominantly negative, we saw that as an unsuccessful one. And they're pretty much evenly split, with about one that was so evenly balanced between the two that we couldn't really categorize them one or the other. Now, when it came to actually talking to them about whether the technology worked, they would say, "Oh, well, we had these bandwidth problems, and we all ended up at the wrong time because of the time zone difference. They hadn't worked it out properly." And of course, Canada change their time when they go forward, and when they go back, they do it at a different week, and that gets confusing as well. So there are these sorts of issues, and every group faced these sorts of issues. There were like communication problems at first, like first floor and second floor are different in different continents. But where there was a successful collaboration, the students were saying things like that they delivered their stuff on time. We asked them to do this, and they did it. I turned up because I thought it was important. I didn't want to let them down. And so what we found was that the students started off with this sort of positive professional ethos about their collaboration. They would complete their tasks to time. They would generate greater trust, which meant that when it came to things like the technology not working, it was kind of like an irrelevance. It was, oh yeah, it happened, but we got around it. So that was kind of overlooked. It was just one of the things that happened, but it was a minor detail that got a bit in the way of them trying to collaborate with each other. And so therefore they ended up with greater cooperation. They felt more motivated to collaborate with each other. And so therefore the cycle improved bit by bit. We saw this sort of positive feedback loop in that kind of direction. However, the students that didn't kind of do their tasks on time, that weren't that bothered about meeting the needs of the students, that sometimes didn't turn up to the meetings on time because they couldn't be bothered, rather because they got the times wrong, they created more of a distance, more of a transactional distance between them and the others. There was a start of a breakdown in trust. And when this happened, when things like bandwidth problems or the technology didn't work, they kind of threw up their hands and said, "Oh, this isn't working now. We can't do this because the technology failed. This is a huge problem. This is a barrier that's getting in our way." And so therefore they just felt, well, we can't be bothered to work online. This is too much of a struggle. And so therefore they didn't meet their tasks on time. And so therefore it demotivated them. And the conclusion that we drew from this was that this is the role that technology has. That technology isn't the be-all and end-all when things are going smoothly in the collaboration, in the personal connection between people. But when that personal connection starts to break down, then all the other things start to get in the way and start to be over exaggerated about how much of an impact they're making. The other thing as well is that the students the technology wasn't a problem when the projects were working, when the collaborations were working. But when they started to break down, the students didn't have any other mechanisms to regain trust. So if you're in a face-to-face environment and somebody hasn't done stuff on time, you turn up and you catch them in the corridor, or you take them for a coffee, and you go, what's going on here? When you're working online, you don't have those other mechanisms to regain trust. And this is where I think online working becomes more problematic than offline working. When there is that when things go wrong, we don't have a range of other mechanisms to fix them, like we do in face-to-face environments. So this is one of the things we found as well, was that, remember, all of the students, these are third-year students, I should have said that earlier, but during their first 2 years, two and a bit years, they'd all worked collaboratively. They'd worked on collaborative projects. However, we found that they hadn't actually developed any real collaboration skills, like project management, like how to maintain trust, how to make sure everyone's included. This was because that when they're in their face-to-face situations, they just meet up with their friends. They just don't have to arrange when a meeting is because they're seeing them all the time anyway. They're going down the pub together, or they're sharing a flat together, or whatever. So none of these actual techniques that we would think of as basic offline collaboration techniques had been acquired by them. It was only when they had to move to an online environment that they gained some of these skills. Of course, there are other things that happen, not specifically because it's online, but because these people that you're working with aren't in the same country, such as cultural differences, but working externally. So there were skills that were needed to be acquired because they're having to put on a sort of more formal footing because they're working with people from outside their university, another university, and they saw this as being quite a motivating thing as well. And then, of course, there are basic things like the use of technology, the digital literacy, and they were gaining the new skills that needed to acquire for that. And one of the things that particularly surprised us was the lack of socialization that happened in these environments. Now, you'll have read about social presence and the role of that in communities and in building up communities. And it's the basis, really, of effective trust in face-to-face environments. And we would expect students to be used to socializing online through Facebook, through Twitter, through Snapchat, well, there's no point listing them because every week there's one new thing that that emerges as a platform for socialization. So we'd have expected the students to be doing this as a sort of part of the course, but they didn't. There was very little socialization happening. We can see here Facebook. They use Facebook for communication, but I've blanked out all of the the names of people and the things they were doing. But you see that when we look at the specifics, they're just saying about meetings, about the agenda, about the formal stuff. There's no chat going on around it, and this we would expect the people to chat. Now, the question is, why isn't this happening? One of the reasons was because they saw it as being a professional environment, and they assumed, not having worked in a professional environment, that socialization isn't something that you do because it's unprofessional. So they created this formal distance, and so that was kind of really a point of education that we should have educated them about, is that no, you do. It's important to socialize. It's important to have that social contract underpinning the formal professional interactions. So we did find that things improved over time. And the comment about correlation, not causation, came from the students themselves. So we thought, well, okay, we see as we're looking at these online meetings, their IT skills are getting better. They're getting more fluid. They're getting to understand what they need to do more because as you work through a process, everything's up in the wall, everything's slightly confusing at first, and as you actually develop the building more and the plans more, then the tasks that need to be set evolve more as well. That was, it's kind of reification through the creation of models. It becomes more concrete, so you get a better grip of what you need to do. And also the presence became more. They interacted a bit more. They chatted a bit more. I mean, this wasn't true of all of the groups. I was watching one of the later ones, and the students at Coventry would call the other ones Loughborough, and the students in Ryerson would say Coventry. They weren't even calling them each other by name. They were calling themselves by the institutions they worked at, which was frankly weird. But this is their formal distance that they were creating from each other. And also the management technique. So, structuring these meetings so that this is happening now, that's happening then, here are the action points, this is what you do next. Now they said it looked like, as I would suggest, that social presence increases because you feel more comfortable with the technology. Then you feel more of an onus on each other to make sure that everyone knows where they are and what their tasks are. And all these things are mutually reinforcing. But no, they said these were just happening all at the same time. But we still, as I said, we still had to some extent this inauthenticity of the virtual connections. They weren't talking to each other like they were real people, and there would be netiquette things, they would suddenly break off and start talking to each other, which you just wouldn't do in a face-to-face environment, even without any experience of collaboration. You wouldn't do that because it's just rude. But they would do it, and I think that it's because they didn't see it as the same as a face-to-face environment. They didn't see the people at the other end as real as they would have done if they'd been in a face-to-face environment. So I've got some videos of this. If anyone's interested, you can go to my YouTube channel, and I can post this in forum somewhere. But I took extracts from some of these videos of the meetings, and you see in the early ones, there's a brilliant bit. The students are saying, "Oh, look at this map here. Look at this stage. Look at this plan. That page, plan the first floor, ground floor, whatever." And you hear this rustling of paper, and this is going on for like 20 minutes as they're leaping through these bits of paper. Meanwhile, all that appears on the screen is just an image of a building. Towards the end, experienced users, and I will just click forward a slide here. So this is what's happening with an experienced group, and you can see that they're doodling on the screen. They're actually adding little bits here and there. When they're talking about a particular bit, you can see there's a sort of circle around thing. Somebody just circled that over and over and over again while he was talking about it, to accentuate the fact that's the bit that he's talking about. And they've got the plan on the screen. So if we go to the previous slide again, so that's where they are at the end. They were talking about stuff like it was a telephone conversation with just a picture. They were using it like a telephone basically, and completely ignoring the screen. But there's a couple of meetings which we've managed to capture these, where I've called an aha moment, where there's somebody struggling and they're talking about this plan, and they're saying, yes, well, we can close this down here and open that up here, and close that down there and open it up there. And the people at the other end aren't getting what they're talking about at all. And then the guy says, I know, I'll show you on the screen. So this technology, which is all about sharing stuff visually, they just hadn't thought of using it that way. And then suddenly thought, oh, it'd be a lot quicker if I just show you what it looks like actually live in our environment. And what happens at that point is that these students move from all having a kind of offline presence, predominantly offline presence, and sitting in their own separate spaces, to coming together to share that space as a shared situation. They have a greater situational awareness of each other as people. They're projecting more their social presence, and this is a transformation that suddenly happens at that point. And from then on, they bond more effectively as a group through this space. So this is kind of what the students got to, and one of the things that we want to impress students need to be able to do when they're collaborating online. You need to get the technology right, so you need to be using the same sorts of platform and the same version of the same applications, to become fluent with the software so that you're not struggling to work out what bit to click on in order to communicate. To do things like online etiquette, you don't just break off and start talking to your friends. You're aware that all the time there are other people who are waiting to listen to what you've got to say. Don't just describe stuff off that you can see offline, but actually show it online. Keep the conversation on the screen. Mess around, doodle, modify each other's stuff, but express yourself in that online environment. Show your face. You want to see what each other looks like. And then do some socializing. You would do that normally in a meeting. You would say, "How did you get on over the weekend? What were you doing? I like the tie," or whatever. You just try and make some sort of connection with each other. And seeing that we do that when we're presenting stuff online, we will include our cats, or we will have a cup of tea, or we will talk about what else has happened. And those sorts of things are important in creating a social presence. Finally, this is something else that these were some of the things that I know classified as things with the students learned that we thought were self-evident, and so we didn't address. And we probably should have done. The thing about the netiquette stuff, that would have thought that would be self-evident, but it wasn't. Supplementing face-to-face. So some of them said things like, we learned to say, I don't know, Trevor. I don't think anyone would call Trevor. Trevor, what do you think? And rather than what do you think? So you would actually highlight somebody, because in a face-to-face environment, you have visual cues. You can look at people and they will know that you're talking to them. And it wasn't natural in the first instances for them to supplement that by saying people's names, for example, or using the technology which enables you to raise a hand or to actually just put a smiley face in or whatever. So to actually make some connection with each other. The chairing, chairing meetings formally. So you take in turns. It's very difficult to butt in an online environment like a synchronous meeting. So you say, well, okay, Trevor again, George, Malcolm, Sabrina, whatever. It's now your turn. Nicolette, it's your turn, and so on. And so making sure everyone gets a chance, but that no one person is excluded. Structuring the meeting, so we do this, then we do that, we have an agenda, that kind of thing. And I've got including everyone twice. This is the other weird thing as well, was that if you are talking and you haven't got something set up on your computer to suppress it, then when your voice comes out of the computer, it's picked up from the speakers by the microphone, and then that voice goes back into the microphone, and you hear your own voice half a second later. It's extremely annoying and very difficult to talk through it. We would look at these recordings, and the students would work through it. They would get that echo coming back. Now, I've seen in a professional environment, people say, there's an echo, and they stop until the echo stops. They'll say, you need to turn off your microphone. You need to get a headset. All these sorts of things. These is now a standard protocol that in a meeting, if you're getting that echo, you don't continue. You ask the person that's causing it to stop causing it, and then you have a host who will then actually cut out their microphone and block them from contributing, because it's seen as disruptive, as sabotaging the meeting. Now, it might not be somebody's fault, but it's about learning the technology enough so you're not disrupting it in that way. Students didn't seem to bother. They just worked through it. There were other things like they would say, we had lots of problems with the background noise. Don't work in somewhere where there's a background noise. Or we couldn't actually do it here because of the bandwidth. Well, don't work in somewhere where there's dodgy Wi-Fi. These seem to be self-evident things that they weren't actually picking up on and avoiding. And then finally, the one that we really felt actually we should have flagged this as an issue, but we thought it was being self-evident that you don't do this, is one of the groups had a deaf student. So this student, hearing impaired, couldn't actually participate entirely in the meetings because he couldn't hear what was going on. And the students would sometimes stop, and then one of the people at his end would then tell him what the conversation was about, recap it. He could read lips, and so therefore could contribute, and then it was extremely alienating and distancing for him. Whereas actually there's the chat option, and if everybody had just used the words, they could have actually typed everything. Then he could have taken a full and equitable part in the conversations. It didn't occur to them to do that. So these are the questions. So basically, then these are some of the issues we faced. And so what I will now do is post some questions in the forum that maybe you could think about in this sort of environment. What kind of things would have helped support the students more? Would you actually change? And would you be able to maybe make more effective, or might actually not work in your particular situation?